I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath. Can you smell it? That distinct, earthy scent of burning coal briquettes lingering in the crisp winter air. Can you hear the rhythmic, metallic ringing of thousands of bicycle bells merging into a symphony on a misty morning street? Or perhaps the soft, rhythmic clacking of your mother's sewing machine late at night? Welcome back, my old friend. Today we are taking a journey back in time to the 1970s and 80s in China. We are going to look at 20 completely normal habits and daily rituals from our youth that would seem absolutely absurd, perhaps even unimaginable, to anyone growing up today. But for us, these were the very fabric of our lives. As we walk down this memory lane, I promise you, by the time we reach the final memory, you will feel the warmth of a crowded room, bathed in the flickering light of a shared miracle. Before we delve into these memories, let us remember how time used to flow back then. It moved so much slower. We did not live our lives rushing from one notification to the next, staring at small glowing screens in our hands. Instead, time was measured by the changing of the seasons, the sound of the factory whistle, and the setting sun calling everyone back to the courtyard. People often say that life back then was difficult, and materially, it certainly was. We had very little. But there is a modern myth that because we lacked advanced technology and wealth, our lives were somehow poorer in spirit. That could not be further from the truth. The lack of material goods meant we had to rely on one another. The scarcity of entertainment meant that human connection, long conversations under the scholar trees, and shared laughter were our greatest joys. We knew our neighbors not just by name, but by the very rhythm of their daily lives. We were patient. We knew how to wait for things. And because we waited, everything we finally received was cherished deeply. Let us begin with something that governed our daily existence: the food ration coupons, or liang piao. Today, people simply scan their phones to buy whatever they desire. But back then, money alone meant nothing if you did not have those tiny, precious squares of paper. They were printed in faded colors, green, brown, or red, with intricate patterns and careful calligraphy stating their worth. Half a jin of grain, 1 jin of meat, a few liang of cooking oil. I remember the immense responsibility of carrying them. Mothers would fold them meticulously, wrapping them in a handkerchief, and placing them deep inside an inner pocket. Losing your grain coupons meant your family might go hungry that month. We would stand in long lines at the state-run grain station, inhaling the dusty, comforting smell of raw rice and flour, listening to the heavy wooden abacus clacking rapidly under the clerk's skilled fingers. It was a time of precise calculation, where every single grain was accounted for, and exchanging a local coupon for a national one before a long trip was a major family event. And speaking of food, how could we ever forget the great winter cabbage storage? To someone today, buying hundreds of pounds of cabbage at once seems like absolute madness. But in the late autumn, usually around November, the air would turn sharp, and horse-drawn carts overloaded with green and white dabai kai would arrive in the cities. The streets would be transformed into mountains of cabbage. The entire family, from the youngest child to the oldest grandparent, would mobilize. We would carry them up the stairs, stacking them carefully along the hallways, on the balconies, and under the window sills. We would lay them out in the sun to dry the outer leaves, turning them into natural protective wrappers. That slightly sweet, slightly earthy smell of drying cabbage permeated every building. For the next several months, through the bitter cold of winter, cabbage was our reliable companion. Cabbage stew with a few slices of pork fat. Cabbage dumplings on special days. Pickled cabbage. It was the taste of survival, of winter, and of home. Now, think about your morning routine. Today we have separate sinks, showers, and endless running water. Back then, the center of our personal hygiene was a single enamel wash basin. You know the one. It was usually painted white, with a bright red rim, decorated with a pair of mandarin ducks, a vibrant peony flower, or the red double happiness character. This basin was a versatile, indispensable tool. In the morning, it held the hot water we used to wash our faces, using a rough cotton towel that smelled of sunshine and laundry soap. In the evening, that same basin, carefully rinsed, was filled with warm water to soak our tired feet before bed. Mothers used it to wash clothes by hand, the soapy water splashing against the chipped enamel, where the black iron beneath was exposed from years of dropping it. That metallic ringing sound, when the basin was accidentally knocked over, is a sound deeply ingrained in our collective memory. It was simple, it chipped over time, but it lasted for decades. Let us talk about how we kept warm and cooked our food. Today, heating turns on with the flick of a switch. In our youth, the rhythm of winter was dictated by the coal briquettes, the feng wo mei. They looked like black, porous honeycombs. Making them or buying them was a dirty, exhausting chore. We would use a special pair of long iron tongs to lift them carefully, ensuring they did not crumble. I can still smell the sharp, sulfuric odor of the burning coal that hung thick in the winter air, especially in the early mornings and late afternoons, when every household was lighting their stoves. You had to be so careful to keep the fire going overnight, by adjusting the draft door just right. If it went out, lighting it again in the freezing morning was a miserable task. And we all knew the silent danger of carbon monoxide, always leaving a small crack in the window, even on the coldest nights. The coal stove was the glowing, messy heart of the home, providing both our meals and our warmth. Do you remember the shoes we wore? Buying shoes from a store was a rare luxury. Instead, we wore cloth shoes with thick, multi-layered soles, the Qianseng Di. The name literally meant thousand-layer soles. Making them was an act of profound maternal love and tireless labor. Grandmothers and mothers would save every scrap of old, worn-out cloth. They would paste these scraps together with homemade flour glue on a wooden board, leaving them in the sun to dry until they were stiff. Then, under the dim yellow light of a low-wattage bulb, they would use a thick needle and an awl to stitch the layers together, pulling the heavy thread tight with a sharp tug. It required immense hand strength. The sight of a mother sitting on a small stool, rubbing her needle against her hair to make it glide easier, is a portrait of that era. When you wore those shoes, the soles felt heavy and solid on the cobblestone streets. They were not waterproof, they were not flashy, but they carried the weight of our mother's unending care. Let us reflect on what constituted a grand luxury back then. Today, people boast about luxury cars or designer bags. For our generation, the absolute pinnacle of pride was acquiring the three major items for marriage: a bicycle, a sewing machine, and a wristwatch. If a family could provide these, it was a guarantee of a respectable start in life. The bicycle, ideally a gleaming black flying pigeon or Forever brand, was polished on Sundays until the chrome handlebars shone blindingly in the sun. The sewing machine, often a peony or butterfly brand, sat in the corner of the room like a prized monument, covered with an embroidered cloth when not in use. And the wristwatch, a Shanghai brand, was wound carefully every morning, its steady ticking a symbol of modernity and punctuality. To own these three things required years of saving money, and just as importantly, acquiring the rare industrial coupons needed to actually purchase them. They were not just objects. They were the hard-earned trophies of a family's labor. Think about how we exercised. There were no fancy gyms or expensive yoga mats. We had the radio calisthenics, the Guangbo Tikao. It is a memory shared by an entire nation. At a specific time in the morning, the crackling loudspeakers perched on telephone poles in factory yards, school playgrounds, and neighborhood squares would crackle to life. The energetic, bright march music would begin, followed by the commanding, rhythmic voice calling out the counts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of people in matching blue or green work uniforms would stand in perfect rows, stretching their arms, bending their waists, and kicking their legs in unison. It was a massive, synchronized ballet of the working class. Even if you were late and running with a steamed bun in your mouth, you felt the rhythm of the nation moving together. It instilled a sense of discipline, unity, and a shared start to the day that is completely lost in today's individualized world. Clothing was treated with a reverence that is hard to explain to the fast fashion generation. We lived by a strict, unspoken rule: new for 3 years, old for 3 years, and patched for 3 years. Throwing away a garment simply because it had a hole was an unthinkable waste. When elbows wore thin or knees tore from playing in the dirt, our mothers would carefully select a patch. Sometimes they tried to match the color, but often the patches were different shades, creating a map of our childhood adventures on our clothes. Having patches was not a sign of shame. It was an absolute norm. A well-executed patch, with neat, tiny stitches, was a testament to a mother's skill. We would proudly wear clothes handed down from older siblings, the fabric softened by years of washing. By the time a shirt was finally deemed unwearable, it was not discarded. It was torn into strips to make mops, or used as the inner layers for those thick cloth shoe soles. Nothing, absolutely nothing, was wasted. Entertainment was rare, making it all the more magical. The arrival of an open-air movie, the Lu Tian Dian Ying, was a festival for the whole community. When word spread that the projectionist was setting up in the village square or the factory clearing, the excitement was palpable. Long before sunset, children would run to claim the best spots, placing bricks or tiny wooden stools on the dirt to mark their territory. 2 tall poles were erected, and a large white canvas sheet was strung between them. As darkness fell, the entire neighborhood would gather, bringing roasted sunflower seeds and thermos flasks of tea. The loud whirring of the film projector would start, a beam of light cutting through the dusty night air, illuminating the dancing dust motes. We would sit there in the cool evening breeze, mesmerized by the heroic tales of the war or the rare romantic dramas. Sometimes we even sat behind the screen, watching the movie in reverse, perfectly happy just to be part of the shared magic in the dark. Shopping for daily groceries was a fundamentally different experience. There were no plastic bags. To the younger generation, a world without plastic seems impossible. But our world was woven from bamboo and cotton. Every morning, mothers and grandmothers would walk to the lively wet market carrying a woven bamboo basket. The basket was sturdy, smelling faintly of old wood and the earth. Inside you would place your vegetables, perhaps a daikon radish with the soil still clinging to it, a bunch of crisp green onions, or a piece of tofu wrapped in a green lotus leaf. If you bought a piece of pork, the butcher would tie it up tightly with a piece of dried straw, so you could carry it dangling from your finger. Buying soy sauce or vinegar meant bringing your own glass bottles to be refilled from a large ceramic vat. It was a slower, more deliberate way of gathering food, deeply connected to the seasons and the raw materials of the earth, leaving behind no trash, only the sounds of haggling and morning greetings. Let us remember our relationship with drinking water. Today, bottled water is everywhere, but we grew up with a deep cultural reverence for hot, boiled water, and the thermos flask was its sacred vessel. These thermoses were beautiful objects, encased in woven bamboo or brightly painted tin, with large red flowers or images of the Great Wall. Inside was a fragile glass vacuum liner. Getting hot water was a daily chore. We would carry 2 thermoses by their sturdy handles, walking to the communal boiler room in the factory compound or the neighborhood alley. You would hand over your water ticket, and the boiler operator would pull a heavy metal lever. The hissing, roaring sound of scalding steam and boiling water rushing into the flask was deafening. We would carefully push the wooden cork back in to seal the heat. That thermos provided the tea for guests, the warm water to wash our faces, and the comfort on a freezing winter night. Breaking the glass liner was a minor household tragedy, mourning both the cost and the lost warmth. Traveling long distances is now a matter of high-speed rails that glide silently across the country in hours. But our journeys were defined by the green, slow trains, the lupice. These trains were massive, rumbling iron beasts, painted a deep, dark green. A journey could take days and nights of sitting on hard, straight-backed benches covered in green faux leather. The carriages were always crowded, smelling intensely of cigarette smoke, instant noodles, mandarin orange peels, and damp wool. The rhythmic, hypnotic clack-clack, clack-clack of the wheels on the tracks was the soundtrack of our travels. Because the journey was so slow, strangers became friends. We would share our hard-boiled eggs and sunflower seeds across the tiny wooden tables, playing cards and telling life stories to people we would never see again. In the summer, all the windows were pushed up, and the soot from the engine would blow into our faces, but we did not care. It was an adventure, a moving village where time stretched endlessly. Have you ever thought about what we did with old newspapers? They were far more than just reading material. They were a vital household utility. In homes with mud walls or cracked plaster, newspapers served as our wallpaper. Every year before the spring festival, families would make fresh paste from flour and water. We would carefully stick pages of the People's Daily or local evening news onto the walls and ceilings. It served two purposes. It kept the cold drafts from whistling through the cracks, and it made the dark rooms look a little brighter. Lying in bed as a child, I used to stare at the ceiling, reading the inverted headlines and political slogans from years past, until I fell asleep. Over time, the paper would turn a deep, smoky yellow from the cooking fires. And of course, softened by rubbing it in our hands, old newspaper was also our toilet paper. It was rough. It left ink on our fingers, but it was just another way we made use of absolutely everything we had. The way we lived together in our neighborhoods is perhaps what I miss the most. Whether it was the hutongs of the north or the factory dormitories in the south, we lived in a state of absolute transparency. Privacy, as people demand it today, simply did not exist, and honestly, we rarely missed it. The courtyard was an extension of the living room. On summer evenings, families would bring their small wooden tables and bamboo chairs outside. We would eat dinner in the open air, fanning ourselves with large palm leaf fans to chase away the mosquitoes. You knew what every family was eating just by the smell drifting from their communal kitchens. If a child was crying, a neighbor would come over with a piece of candy. If someone fell ill, the entire courtyard would pitch in to help. We shared our joys, our arguments, and our poverty. The sound of elders chatting under the shade of the scholar tree, playing Chinese chess while sipping tea from jar glasses, was the heartbeat of our community. Consider the simple act of washing our hair. The aisles of modern supermarkets are filled with countless bottles of specialized shampoos and conditioners. In the 1970s, we relied on the gifts of nature and extreme simplicity. Many of us, especially in the countryside or smaller towns, used soap locust pods, the zhao jiao. We would collect the long, dark brown pods from the trees, crush them, and soak them in hot water until they released a rich, slippery foam. It smelled earthy and raw, completely devoid of artificial perfumes. Others used the same hard yellow laundry soap that we used for washing clothes. It left our hair feeling stiff and rough, but remarkably clean. And washing hair was not a daily luxury. It usually happened once a week at the public bathhouse. We would carry our little bamboo baskets with our soap and towel through the snow, eager for the enveloping heat of the steam room, where the echoing voices of neighbors and the splashing of hot water washed away the week's fatigue. Photography is now instant, endless, and disposable. We take hundreds of photos a day and never look at them again. But in our youth, taking a photograph was a sacred, formal ritual. We did not own cameras. Instead, once a year, usually during the spring festival, the family would put on their absolute best clothes, ensuring every button was fastened and every collar was straight, and walk to the state-run photo studio. The studio smelled of developing chemicals and old canvas. The photographer, a serious man, would arrange us in front of a painted backdrop of a lake or a mountain. He would duck under a dark cloth behind a massive wooden camera. "Look here, hold still," he would command. The bright, blinding pop of the flash would make us blink. Then came the agonizing wait of several weeks before we could collect the single, precious black and white print. Sometimes, for extra money, the studio would hand tint the photo, adding a faint pink to our cheeks. Those few photos remain the most cherished treasures of our past. When we look back at old crowds from the 1970s, the younger generation often asks why everyone looked exactly the same. Our fashion was a sea of blue, green, and gray. We wore the traditional Mao suits or military-style jackets. The fabric was rough, durable cotton, designed for hard work, not for showing off. Yet within that sea of uniformity, there was a profound sense of equality. No one was judged by expensive brand names because they did not exist for us. But human nature always seeks beauty, and we found subtle ways to express it. A young woman might wear a brightly colored, hand-knitted scarf tucked discreetly under her gray collar. Or perhaps she would wear a shirt with a delicate floral pattern, only visible at the cuffs. We took immense pride in keeping our collars crisp and our clothes immaculately clean, despite the coal dust. It was a time when true character was judged, not by the label on your jacket, but by the calluses on your hands and the honesty in your eyes. Before the winter chill set in, every household was filled with the rhythmic clicking of bamboo knitting needles. Buying a ready-made woolen sweater was incredibly expensive, so our mothers knitted them by hand. But yarn was scarce, so we unraveled old, outgrown sweaters. I remember sitting on a small stool, holding my hands out to keep the old, crinkled yarn taut, while my mother wound it into a ball. To straighten the crinkled wool, she would wrap it around a heavy wooden cutting board and hold it over the steam of a boiling pot. The smell of wet wool filled the room. Then, for weeks, she would knit. She could knit while walking, while talking to neighbors, without ever looking down at her hands. The sweaters were thick, sometimes slightly scratchy, and often made of different colored yarns pieced together from various old garments. When you put that heavy sweater on during a freezing January morning, you were enveloped in the physical manifestation of your mother's time, patience, and love. Our connection to the outside world, beyond our immediate courtyard, came through a single, magical device, the transistor radio. It was usually housed in a heavy brown leather case, treated with the utmost respect. Turning the large plastic dial was an exercise in patience, wading through static and high-pitched squeals to find a clear signal. In the evenings, after dinner, the family would gather around it. We would listen to the rich, dramatic voices of the storytellers, reciting classical tales like The Romance of the Three Kingdoms or Water Margin. The imagination painted vivid pictures of ancient heroes battling in our modest, dimly lit rooms. We also listened to the news broadcasts, hanging on to every word about the nation's progress. That little radio was our theater, our newspaper, and our classroom. The soft glowing dial in the dark room, and the warm, static-laced voices emanating from the speaker, provided a sense of comfort and connection to a vast, unseen world. And finally, we arrive at a memory that represents the turning point of our era, the arrival of the first black-and-white television in the neighborhood. It was an event of monumental proportions. Whoever managed to acquire one, usually a tiny 9-inch or 12-inch screen housed in a wooden cabinet, instantly became the center of the community. On the evenings when a popular show or a sports match was broadcast, the owner would place the TV on a table facing the open door or in the middle of the courtyard. Dozens of neighbors would bring their own stools, crowding into the small space, sitting shoulder to shoulder. The antenna, often affectionately called rabbit ears, had to be constantly adjusted, sometimes wrapped in aluminum foil, to clear the snowy picture. But we did not mind the poor quality. We sat in the dark, mesmerized by the moving images, sharing collective gasps, laughter, and tears. In that flickering bluish light, surrounded by the warmth of our neighbors, we were not just watching a screen, we were sharing a miracle together. As we open our eyes and return to the present day, it is easy to look at the smartphones in our hands and marvel at how far we have come. But when we look back at those worn-out grain coupons, the patched clothes and the crowded courtyards, we realize something profound. We do not actually miss the poverty, the freezing winters, or the exhausting labor. What we truly miss is the version of ourselves that existed back then. We miss the innocence of our youth, the slow, deliberate pace of time, and most importantly, we miss each other. We miss a time when a flickering 9-inch television was enough to bring an entire neighborhood together in pure, unadulterated joy. Our past may seem absurd to the world today, but it was incredibly rich in the things that truly matter. If this journey brought a smile to your face or a tear to your eye, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like so we can continue to preserve these precious memories together. Now I want to ask you, which of these 20 memories touched your heart the most? Or is there a different lost ritual from your youth that you still think about? Please, take a moment to write your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I cannot wait to hear from you.